Good morning, student. Architecture 112. Today we will discuss for chapter 11, Greek architecture. Before we start with this one, I just let you know that we have the short movie right here. It's on one famous pianist. He have the concert in the theater in Greece. So I just left right here for you guys. If you have time, you can click on here and you can watch the video. Okay, so before we start with the Greek architecture, I just want to let you know that you need to review for all of the chapters from chapter 4, 6, 9, 10, 11, and after that 12 before we start with the midterm. So that's why this is the chapter. We have one more chapter, chapter 12, and after that we can review for the final. Go with the chapter. You know, Greeks, before you learn about Egypt, you know that they have a lot of people for philosophy and mathematics, and the people, the scientists, they famous about the math and the physics because the land expand every year with the Nile River. So that's why they have calculated the boundary. They need to, you know, to measure everything like that. So they're famous about the mathematics and physics. About the Greek, we have they proud and self-aware about their puppets and the sacred architecture. The pantheons, when you talk with the Greeks, you need to remember the pantheons, the temples. So the Greeks, until the mid from 18th century, during 19th century, this expedition, they rediscovered the Pantheons with on straight and led to the revival in the Greek styles. Until mid-19th century, the Greek value were to be the well-educated person. Ancient Greek periods from 750 to 350 BC, they learned much from Egypt. The sculpture, the post, the lintel temple architecture were adapted, and this were admitted. The ability to celebrate human capacity were began in Greece and had remained the mainstay of the Western civilization ever since. Many Greek values and ideas are parts of our culture today. So many culture today effect from the Greek. For most of us, architecture is easy to take for granted. It's everywhere in our daily life. Sometimes elegant, other time shabby, but generally ubiquitous. How often do we stop to examine and contemplate its form and style? Stopping for that contemplation offer not only for opportunity to understand one daily surround, but also to appreciate for the connection that exists between architectural form in our own time and those from the past. Architectural traditional and design have the ability to link disparate culture together over time and space. About the Greek architecture, refer to architecture of the Greek-speaking people who inhabited the Greek mainland and the Peloponnese, the island from the Aegean Sea, the Greek colonies in Ionia, the coastal Asia Minor, and the Magna Graecia, the Greek colony in Italy and Sicily. Greek architecture stretched from c. 900 BCE to the 1st century CE, with the earliest extant stone architecture dating to the 7th century BCE. Greek architecture influenced Roman architecture and architects in profound ways, such that the Roman imperial architecture adopt and incorporate many Greek elements into its own practice. The geography from the Greeks, unlike the Egypt, the Greeks is a very different geography and climate influenced more dynamic culture. Greece includes more than the broad peninsula, extending from Balkans at the southeast Europe. Greece territory also includes the shore from Iceland, scattered to the south and the east, as well as the area along the coast, Anatolia, or Asia Minor. The rich landscape erupts a corrugated mass of limestone and marble mountain ridge extending into the sea like fingers, sheltering base and covers. The land is divided into three main parts: the center of the principal peninsula, Attica, and the city of Athens, southeast, Crete, and Egypt south. Minoan and Mycenaean Greece. The oldest culture was Minoan. It started from 3400 BCE to 1400 BCE. This is the classic period, probably from 479 BCE to 338 BCE. That's the Bronze Age culture. The Knossos Palace measures more than 460 square feet, centered about an open court running on roughly north-south axis from the Skagit mountain to the sea. Running through the building were the sophisticated plumbing and training system. The place wall were 4 and 5 stories high, and the series of setback around light courts and the stairwell. 2100 BCE, Minoan settlements were taken over by a new group and moved down from north. 1600 BCE, the newcomers had established their own distinguished culture called Mycenaean, was new cultural and political center. The Minoan cultural influence diminished rapidly. Around 1550 BCE, around 1115 BCE, the Mycenaean culture flourished and its influence expanded. Located in Greece on elevated hilltops, and Mycenaean city survived by their tsunami. On the highest ground, the principal palace was built behind thick wall, the large, irregular, but carefully fired stones. The Greeks looked these ancient ruined wall of massive rock blocks could have been built only by the mythical one Eve giant Cyclops, and hence this type of masonry can be called that Cyclopean. This is the map from the Greece, and this is the periods they call, and with the date is around 200, 1200. They call this Henriette, and 800 to 500 they call it Pertus, 500 to 400 millenaristics, 400 to 300 philosophers, and 300 to 100 Hellenistics. So this is the map from the West Asian ancients. So the land is divided into three parts: the center of principal peninsula, and after that Attica. You can see right here, Athena right here, and after that this is the center part from the ancient, and the city of Athens is right here. The Crete and Egypt south. This is the Crete and Egypt south. They call the Knossos. Around 1150 BCE, the Mycenaean settlements were swept over by another group from north to direct ancestor of the classical Greeks. The Greeks later called them the Dorians. The Mycenaean culture collapsed, although some of the cultural strongholds, especially Athens, and resisted. 750 BCE, the stone architecture re-emerged on mainland, and with it, beginning of the classical Greek civilization. At the same time, the Greek colonization of Mediterranean began in response to the poor agricultural condition at home and the need of raw material. Although we used the word colony, they were not mercantilist sources of the sources of raw material and the sense of 18th century European colonies. The Greek colony were wholly independently a joint community. The Greek language was spread the land of Mediterranean and around the Black Sea. For nearby 1,000 years, the Greek language became an international mode of communication. Another part is the Greek character. The Greeks were confident in their own culture superiority. The Greeks had an innate love of largesse, the logo, the work that can be variously translated as reason, idea, conception, the work or natural order, whose opposites were traditional chaos. The Greeks saw the balance and symmetry as the ideal. The Greeks tried to achieve their own thing, were agreed that quality for excellence and the result from the refinement and the test human endeavors, music, poetry, culture, and architecture. This is some of the balance. The Greek is started from 1700 to 1380 BCE. The column, the tapering inward toward the bottom, were found to be painted deep red when excavated after 900. They paint with the red one and they will escalate after 900. This is the map from this one. And the other projects from Greece, we can see that the city wall, that's the on of the wall from the city, and the Lion Gate. Massinid, Greece start from 1300 BCE. This is the Lion Gate. If you look at the map, they have many gates, but this is the Lion Gate where you can get inside from the city. This is the entrance for Massinid. It's around 1600 to 1100 BC. If you see right here, this is the whole here is the wall right here. You can see the wall right here, the wall outside, and this is the gate. They call that's the Lion Gates, and you see here, this is the gate, and this is the lion. So in the picture right here, you can see very clear about the client. See that? That is the lion, not client, sorry. This is the lion, and you can see the lion right here, both, and this is the gate to go inside. This is the wall to the city wall. You see that? That's the gate, and you can see clear about this one. Okay, the Olympian gods were described in the Greek myths in the human term and depicted in the perfect human form. The temples are usually Doric in style, and some Greeks they found the comfort in mystical cult. But the most part Greek religion were straightforward affair, making the proper offering to the gods. Greeks sought immortality through the achievement of excellent indeed, so that accomplishment would be recorded, spoken of, remembered forever. The achievement from the Plato, Aristotle, and other Greek philosophers approved that. In 430 BCE, the total population of the region from the Attica, include the Athens, were roughly 330,000, of which 15,000 were resident and about 115,000 were slaves in the domestic service. Of the remaining 200,000, about 35,000 were male citizens over 18, and the rest of them are women and children. About the Greek polis, the most important political contribution of the Greek civilization was the invention of the democracy in the polis of Athens, spread by Athenians to the city over which Athens had influence. The polis were a community of family related to the common ancestor. A person did not move into or join a city. Those who travel and live in cities other than those where they were born were considered resident aliens. The polis encompassed the city and farm prowess. The Greeks preferred to live in the city in the close quarters and walk out to their farm rather than live in isolated farm villa. This is one of Acropolis Palace. It increased from 1400 to 1200 BCE. You can see Mycenaean city were built atop an identity stronghold as the Tyrian at Megaron. You can see this is one of the map from the city, and this is the unit right here. You can see this one right here. They call that Meganon's unit. Acropolis Palace, this own palace, and this is one unit in there. You can see there's one unit in there. If talk about Greek, we need to talk about the temple. They have a lot of temple, and right now it's still in construction because there's a lot of collapse. So now they have few of the framing keeping, and they have construction to remain the historic value for this one. One of example you can see that's the temple from Porcelain Sunya, the southeast of Athens. Right now you just see the frame is keep remain and the rest of them is gone. This is an example from the temple of Zeus. Start from c. 470 to 456 BCE. Olympia, Greece. Okay, Plato is one of philosophers. Described the ideal polis as have 5,000 male citizens. Aristotle wrote in Politics that the man should be able to recognize all of the male citizens of his polis by sight. From 461 to 429 BCE, the leader in Athens were Pericles. He was elected general for 15 years in a row and the 13th time in all. The Greek city plan, Olympiagos, and later a succession of the temple were built at the base of Acropolis. The path leading out to the surrounding farm eventually became street, and along one of these, northwest of the mass of Acropolis, a roughly triangular open space was set aside of the Agora, whose boundaries were defined by the surrounding house and public building. Agora was the social, economic, and political communal heart from the Greek city. In Athens, the Agora were defined first by private house and the shops, but by the 3rd century BCE, stoeis, long buildings, stoeis that mean long building, open by colonnades along one side from provide for the shelter, and its artisan selling wares began to build. Domestic architecture and public building. The private house of the Greeks generally was small and unelaborate until the 4th century BCE, when the Greek culture entered the new phase. The new phase they called that Hellenistics. In other city, the plan were adapted to the regular street patterns. In such artisan's house, there may be the room set aside for the production of the pottery or metalwork. Aside from this room, the house consists of a small cobblestone court open to the sky, with the series of the room open on its compared to the number, size, style of later Roman public building. You can compare with the Roman building later. This is some formula. You remember the talus and concept the two rooms before. If you have the triangle like this and you have divide between the triangle and you have the equal ratio, for example, this is DA over BD equal AE over AC equal DE over BC, something like that. You have some like fractal like this. And the other one, you learn a lot about the right triangle with the calculation. For example, you have the right triangle like this, and this side, if you have square feet from this side plus square feet from this side, you have the longest one square feet. So for example, you have here the formula a square plus b square equals c square. That means a, b, c, and a square plus b square equals c square, the longest one. So this is the right triangle. You learn a lot in the middle school and high school. This is the Pythagoras. So this is an example from the temple from Apollo, the Delphi. Right now, just the frame, everything is gone. Acropolis in Athens, Greece, view from the west. You can see like this, especially in this end. This is the west view. In Athens, Greece, from 150 BCE, they built the king Attalus of Pergamum as the gift for the city from Athens, reconstruct from 1950s. This illustrates for well the Hellenistic civic building that began to lie and defy the Greek Argos. The long rectangular building open on one side to face to Arga. These often had an internal row from the columns down to the middle to the support of the roof and upper floor. It's worth fortunate that the generally begin Greek climates is possible to build teachers in the open, for there were no practicable way to cover the building seating 14,000 people. The Greek temple. The Greek temple had been described a monumental sculpture set in the landscape. This was placed in the sacred precinct, delineated by the low wall or the curb. The temple themselves may be a line, an axis leading out to the mountain peaks in the landscape. It starts from 1050 BCE. The Greek temple emerged, a wooden structure with upright columns completely around the center chamber. The temple was originally built of the wood. As the time passed, it was replaced part by part with elements of the stone. The Greeks built their temples of local stone at Olympia. It was the coarse limestone covered with the plaster made with the marble dust. This is topography map from Athens. Topography map from Athens shows elevation for all of them. It starts from 400 BC. And this is Aruga Athens in Greece. You can see that it's whole thing like this. And the most of them we will focus on this one. We have many buildings, and they call that the store. The store is that means the long building. It starts from C100 BCE. And this is also the map for the plan in the print. Asia Minor, it starts from around 450 BCE. They built at the top from the mount and show how to the Crete plan. Could be adapted to the sloping hill on side. It's a sloping hill, but they have the crystalline and it's start to do with this one. This is the map where you can see the house from print Asia Minor 450 BC. They have more regular like the room with the yard and some of the center court. So this is one example, so you can see like that. And this is the house near with Aruna Athens raised from 450. You see that it's the course, and after that the room. This is an example from the call that the store of Apollos Athens raised from 150. The store is, that means the long building. You see that's the long buildings with a lot of column aside, and they have 2 levels from Athens. And this is interior from during Asia Minor for 200 BCE. This is the interior. The small covered buildings were built by the rich 2 house. Their civic council is maybe 66 feet, and they could seat about 700 people. 700 people with variable like this. This is one famous theater from Polycarpus, from the younger, the teacher, from Greece start from 350 BCE, and you see that they have the big theater, they join religious site, and they were built into the hillside. So that means, you know, the hillside, so that's why this is the hillside, so that have the slope. And the seats here extend around 200 degrees. Look down on low. That means right here, they look down from the state. Temporary structure. And you can see this is the structure from this one is slope. And they have the building right here. And on of the seating is slope down to this one. You can see this one slope down. And this is the hill area. And you know, a lot of people for one of the teacher. So that's why on the short movie I show you for the famous pianist, and Yanni, he's a have one concert in that teacher. This is the column detail. You can see that's many they call that capital. Capital is different. You can see that they change the style, and also you can see and tabular on the top. It change the style also for each of the column, the cornice, and after that we have the base. You see the base, some kind the base they show different you know, texture. The sharp is similar, but just change the width from this one. The base, the capital, and the cornice, and the entabulus, it change. So this is more detail about the column. Acropolis were the focal point from Panathenaea festival, observed every year on Athena's birthdays in late summer. The Nike temple is the first element from Acropolis. It delicate, no ionic columns, only 4 at each end, contrast with the massiveness of the Doric columns of the next element to come into the view. The entrance gate to the Acropolis, the last major temple constructed on Acropolis, that is the Erechtheion, were also the most unusual from 421 to 40 BCE. So the Greeks refer to the temple as the term from overt meaning. During temple derived from the Latins. This basic form from remained unchanged for its concept from century and the 8th century BCE. Rich architecture began to make the move from ephemeral material, its wood, mud, brick, thatch, to permanent material. So we can see that's one. This is one, like before I show you home, and this is one of them. So you can see that's one unit just look like that. The temple from, this is one temple from Zeus. Olympia from Greece 468 to 460 BCE. That's the whole map, and this is one unit. You can see it big like this. The Parthians, the first building to be rebuilt on the Burns Acropolis, were the largest of them all and dominates the hill and the plain of Attica below. They were the temple Athenas, Patinos, goddess of war and the wisdom. A replacement began from 490 BCE. Early stage from the construction were destroyed by the Pisan structure. The Parthenos represent for the maturity from the Greek classical form. So this is one example. It's still right now for the temple of Athena, Nike, Acropolis, Athens, for the wreath. It starts from 4:35 and 4:20. So right now the visitor can come in this side, the other side is on the construction. This is the map from the temple, and this is the unit. So you can see this is one. And this is the column structure. If you see right here, it's right there. And it's here. And you see that. And it's right there. So you can see right here. It's right here. Right there. And the Parthenos in Athens is a dedicated for Athena, located on Acropolis. This is one Parthenos, and it is the Salas. This looks like the room for the prayer, and after that, the entrance right here. Zeus temple. Before we see the picture right here is another view from that's one from the west is, and this one from Olympia is a before and now. They have view of the correction step like this. Okay, this is another sample from temple of Apollo at Dina. Didymus is outside from milestone Asian Minor, begins from 330 BCE, and right now you can see it's almost destroyed. It just keeps some column. This is the unit before, and this is the name from the special from each of them. Staircase, open court, the shrine of Apollos, in a room right here for a prayer. Staircase to upper level. This is the staircase and entrance to the ramp down to the court. 30, they have section elevation like this, a step down to the Scylla, the portico, Fraunas, sacred spring. This is another project in Jordan's a treasure. It starts from 100 BCE to 200 CE, cut out of the solid cliff face. You look at this, it's on the face from the treasure. This is the face. If you look at this, and this is, you look at the mountain. It's during the Hellenistic age. They have to show how the classical design elements were used in the decorate for sculpture. Way during the Hellenistic age, you look at this, a lot of sculpture in the, in the side from the mountain. You can see that's very sculpture about the column, about the rooftop, and the second level, with on of the sculpture under to the rock mountain. Okay, so this is the last one. That's the Erection from 421 to 405 BCE, Acropolis, Athens. And same thing, right now we can see the frame, some of them, the rest of them is gone. This is, you can see the column is still there, and you can see the base, the shaft, the capital, and after that Antipolis. They have a little bit change, but you can see the detail on here. This from Hera II, start from 460 BCE, the rich Doric temple forms. The classical period slightly dedicated to the Hera, piece from Ladins, previously Posidonia. So this is on up chapter 11. One more time, we have the short movie right here. If you want to watch from one of the big outside theater, you can open the video and to look at this. So that's all for chapter 11 about the rich architecture. Hope to see you next time, and thanks again for watching and reading for this chapter before we go with the midterm. Thank you so much, and see you next time.